Monster Hunter Stories 2 is pretty much Monster Hunter's version of Pokemon. With an interesting combat system and a unique way to gain an army of monsties, I decided to see if I could beat Monster Hunter Stories 2 with Nuzlocke rules, which will be in the description down below. Will I be able to tame these monsties to victory, or will they end up mauling me to death? Let's find out. With the fear of Razewing Ratha being on the island, I start my training to become a rider. Kena gets assigned by the chief to train me, and she lends me one of her Velocidrome until I get my own Monstie. We discover a Kulu-ya-ku, also Navaru, who makes a deal with us. If we defeat Kulu-ya-ku, then he'll give us the egg he found. Kulu-ya-ku plays the role of a tutorial boss monster, so pretty easy to beat. Afterwards, I hatch the egg and receive my own Kulu-ya-ku and name it Burb. Afterwards, I'm tasked to investigate a new monster den on Rider Overlook alone. Before heading out, Kena explains that I'm now able to accept subquests, so I grab a few before heading out. I make my way to the new den. At the end of the den, I run into a Velocidrome blocking our way to the nest, so we had to fight it. Velocidrome is primarily a speed monster, so I switched to Burb, who is primarily technical, giving him the advantage here. After landing some effective attacks, it then enrages, and so its attacks went from speed to power. I use a Rite attack with Burb doing decent damage. Burb has a power clash with Velocidrome, in which Burb wins. I switched to Ranmar since Velocidrome is primarily going to use power attacks now. After a few more attacks, we kill the Velocidrome. I grab an egg from the nest, which is obviously going to be another Velocidrome egg, but it's a story egg, so whatever. On my way back, I found a common den in South Comuna Forest and picked up an Anjanath egg. I also found a rare den where I picked up a Boldrum egg. When I returned to the village, I reported to Kena and Chief Gara and showed them the egg I got from the Overlook den. Once I was done talking with them, I made my way to hatch my eggs. I hatched the Anjanath, naming him Tank, and I hatched Boldrum, naming it Pumbaa. The scout fights lead us to find a Yian-Kut-Ku. Yian-Kut-Ku proves to be a pretty easy fight and is easily defeated. But instead of dying, it flees, allowing us to enter its den. In its den, I grab a Yian-Kut-Ku egg. We return to the village and I hatch the egg and named the Yian-Kut-Ku Firebird. Original, I know. I find the blacksmith and upgrade my greatsword to the max. I also make the bone armor set to get the non-element attack boost. Naviru and I talk to a Malinx who wants some bottle caps. So, with the aid of Kena, we make our way to the Ever Den, where I also find a Kulu bow. Wow. Which makes you wonder who the heck leaves a bow in a chest in a random den. But at this point, who cares? It's a free bow. We get to the end of the den and find a Boldrum. We start fighting it. Boldrum is pretty easy with it being primarily a power attacker and having Ranmar being a primarily speed attacker. The odds were in our favor. However, Anjanath shows up to crash the freaking party. Anjanath uses a pretty strong attack. Luckily, Kena uses a flash bomb, allowing us to escape. Despite that, we managed to find the chest with bottle caps. We report to the Malinx and I trade some bottle caps for a shock trap recipe. Some riders report in about a Puki who beat them. Bruh, how are y'all this weak? We go deal with Puki and yeah, this thing was not difficult. Pumbaa being a power type made fighting Puki pretty easy. You see that, guys? It's not that hard. Afterwards, I grab a Puki egg. I return to the village, hatch the egg, and name it Chameleon. After upgrading my weapons, it was time to fight Anjanath. Anjanath starts off as a speed user, so I started with Burb. I focused on using tentacle attacks to beat its speed attacks. After doing enough damage, it enrages. I switched to Ranmar since Anjanath's attacks will now be more power style. We continue to damage it and it enters its third form. I switched to the hammer to see if it will perform better, which it does about the same as the greatsword. Anjanath still is using power attacks, so I just focus on speed attacks. I switch weapons again, this time to the bow, which is the more ideal weapon for this fight. Anjanath then fires its strongest attack. Luckily, we all survive and it goes back to its normal form and back to speed attacks. A combined rider's attack does massive damage to its nose bone. Ranmar then breaks Anjanath's nose, which causes Anjanath to fall, allowing us to land critical damage, allowing us to break its body. After some more attacks, Kena's rider's attack finishes Anjanath off. With Anjanath out of the way, we accept the Rathalos egg and agree to flee the island before the hunters can find the egg, as it contains the wings of ruined Rathalos. Ha, good luck getting me, punk. I make it to Ruto village, and the village leaders explain that I need to complete the rite of channeling in order to handle the raised wing Rathalos. But before I can learn it, they task me to deal with a Palumu first. In Etuli Lefty Trees, I find a rare den where I pick up a Royal Ludroth egg. Palumu is pretty simple, but does manage to kill Pumbaa. Hakuna Matata. With the aid of Alwin, we took care of Palumu and I grabbed its egg. Next, I made the Puki sword and shield because I didn't like how with the greatsword skills you can inflict damage to yourself. I make my way to the hatchery and hatch my Royal Ludroth and name it Simba. I hatched the Palumu as well, naming it Fluffy. Next, we're tasked to deal with a Basarios. Basarios is pretty simple, although it does run away twice. But on the third fight, we managed to slay it. I then return to the village and the chief teaches me how to perform the rite of channeling. Next up is Yian Garuga. I used Royal Ludroth primarily and the fight is pretty easy. I then make gear out of it. After rescuing some felines, a Duramboros attacks us. Duramboros proves to be pretty easy. I make my way back to the village and make Duramboros' hammer. Next, Nergigante is causing some problems in the West Forest, so Alwin and I go take care of it. Nergigante is primarily a speed and a tentacle fighter and was overall an easy fight. Alwin and I decide to have a match. I mostly used Chameleon and focused on poisoning and attacking whoever seemed to have the lowest health. After repeating the pattern, eventually Alwin is defeated. I then grab the Nergigante egg and head back to the village. With my new Nergigante sword and shield, it was time to fight the boss monster, Rathian. Rathian is pretty annoying with her poison tail attacks. Once the tail was broken, her poisoning slowed down. Rathian in her normal form attacks with speed, and when enraged, she uses power style. So with my speed and tentacle monsters, I was able to take her down. We then make our way back to the village and hatch Ratha. In Lolaska Winter Way, I find a common den and pick up a great baggy egg. In a rare den, I pick up a Baroth egg. On my way to Khan Village, we run into an infected Zamtrios. This fight is pretty standard. It starts as a tentacle attacker, so I switch to Simba to do power attacks. Zamtrios then transforms into its ice armor form and primarily uses speed attacks. Luckily, it focused on me, so I didn't need to switch. Zamtrios then goes back to normal to then go into its power form. Simba got pretty low on health, so I switched to Nightwing. Zamtrios hits us with a strong area attack. Luckily, Avinia comes to our rescue. With her assistance, we defeat the Zamtrios. We make it to the village. I hatch my Yian Garuga egg that I got from a static encounter in Mount Harzgay. Next, I hatch the Great Baggy and the Baroth. Afterwards, I meet the chief. We get permission to stay in the village for a while as a way to repay us. Wait, for what? Oh, sir, I think you have me mistaken. Oh well, at least we can stay. We're then tasked to help bring order to the Lolaska forest. We find that the culprit is none other than a Nersilia. Naturally, we beat it pretty easily. I find a Zamtrios in Lolaska Lake. I make a retreat and retrieve its egg. In the Lolaska forest, I find a Nersilia and cause it to retreat so that I can grab its egg as well. I then hatch the Zamtrios in the Nersilia eggs. I give my report to the chief and he needs us to help clear a path in the mines. At the base of Mount Legiana, I find a rare den and pick up an Anjanath egg. We find a Baroth causing a ruckus in the mine. Baroth is a pretty easy fight. We then get fur from Topikadachi for the windmill. Next we deal with a Kezu who takes Rex down before we take it down. Finally, we get to the pit to deal with the third boss, Seltas Queen. Seltas Queen has a Seltas joining as well. Both are tentacle fighters, so I use Ratha mostly. Luckily, they were weak to fire, allowing my sword and shield to do a lot of damage. Seltas then mounts Seltas Queen and started using power attacks, so I switched to Nergigante. Surprisingly, it was easier to deal with them like this than separate. We then knocked Seltas off, allowing us to beat up Seltas Queen. Seltas returns and they go back to using Tentacle, so I bring Ratha back and heal him up. The fight continues to be the same, but I don't switch Ratha out and we beat Seltas Queen. We find old Dede in the springs. However, he teaches us that we shouldn't force Ratha's powers to come out to then seal it. He then ends with that if power is not important, then what is, and that we must find the answer. We make our way to the pit and discover Legiana. Legiana is pretty easy. I switch to Zamtrios to resist ice and to counter its speed attacks. Using a fire weapon also helped. When enraged, Legiana switches to power attacks. This didn't really change the fight by much. Once it got into the air, it started using tentacle attacks. I used a kinship skill with Zamtrios, dealing a decent amount of damage towards it. We knock it out of the air, and I switch to Ratha to take advantage of this. Eventually, Legiana gets affected by the pit. Ratha's power gets unleashed and it goes crazy, chasing Legiana down. It tries to obliterate Legiana but misses and destroys a windmill. Bruh, seriously? After all that hard work? Luckily, old Dede comes to calm Ratha down. Avinia is pretty upset with us, but after thinking about the whole thing, we realize the answer to old Dede's question. We return and show old Dede that kinship is the answer. He then unlocks Ratha's powers. We track Legiana down and defeat it. The stupid hunter kid shows up and demands we hand over Ratha. Boy, who the heck do you think you are? The hunters then surround us, and I guess because they're adults, they overpower us. This stupid boy attempts to kill Ratha. Luckily, Lilia stops it, but still has Ratha taken away because of orders. Ugh, bruh. I just got his powers unlocked. To prove our strength, we join Roberto to deal with some monster issues. We find a Plesioth outside of its normal living quarters and defeat it. We then traveled to its original home and discovered that a Cephadrome chased it out, and so we defeated it. We then reported to Lilia and are told to go to the lab to deal with a monster that broke free. At Alcala Highlands, I encountered the Royal Tigrex and caused it to retreat, allowing me to gain its egg. I then hatched the Gendrome, Cephadrome, and the Tigrex eggs, naming the Tigrex Destroyer. Next, I transferred a critical gene from Firebird and gave it to my Destroyer. I crafted the Tigrex Hammer and Greatsword. On the way to the lab, some riders block our way. The first two were a Nergigante rider and a Yian Garuga rider. Nightwing became very useful for this fight since Spike Bomb hits all of them. Roberto and I were limited to attacking the monsters until I do a kinship skill with one of my monsties or a wide attack was used. The opponents mostly used speed and tentacle attacks, with Roberto and Nightwing using wide attacks. We beat the first two riders. We then fight the T-Rex rider, who was also relatively easy. They focused primarily on speed attacks, so I switched to Spooky, but unfortunately Spooky dies. I bring Bruce out and we beat the rider. We get to the lab and find that the hunters are betraying the scribes and are relocating Ratha. Bruh, what the heck? We follow the path of the ship and are interrupted by a raged Diablos. Afterwards, we get to the tower where the hunters are giving a cult leader Ratha. Kyle tries to stop them but is easily defeated by the older hunters. I don't even understand what is happening anymore. Another rider block says from reaching Ratha, he uses a ruby Basarios. We managed to defeat them. Kyle starts questioning who the cult people are, and Nabiru calls him out for being partly responsible for this, and he's not wrong, idiot boy. Roberto calms the scene and recruits Kyle. I make the Monobolos armor and continue to progress the tower. We slay a Monobolos and a Black Diablos. I then make my attempt to rescue Ratha and Anna, but I get sent flying. Luckily, the kinship gives Ratha power and wings to break free and saves me. We then save Anna and flee. We head to the Pit of Remembrance and Anna tells the story of what happened to Red. We then investigate the pit and find an enraged Crimson Kuropeko. The fight is pretty simple. It summons a Plum Daimo Hermitar. Unfortunately, Scar dies, but Crimson dies of poison. Baloo then finishes Plum off. We then fight a Mizutsune and Kyle shows up and helps drive it away. We then battle Legiacris to help the felines out. Legiacris has 3 forms. His base form uses power attacks. Luckily, Ratha uses speed and power attacks. He then enrages and uses speed attacks, which luckily Ratha switches to using tentacle attacks, which helps a lot. His 3rd form, he starts using tentacle attacks, so Ratha and I switch to power attacks. He causes me to lose a heart part, but we eventually kill it. I hatch the green Nargacuga and name it Joker. Naviru tells us about his past with Sarge. I then make a Legiacris retreat, allowing me to pick up its egg. I hatch it and name it Laggy. I made the Legiacris's great sword. We then find the Rage Raid Mizutsune and fight it. It starts as a technical attacker, so I started with Ratha. The Legiacris greatsword came in really handy as Mizutsune is weak to thunder. I mostly played support unless it was safe for me to attack. Rather causes it to get burned with Savage Fireball. Mizutsune started going for speed attack, so I switched to red. I end up losing 2 hearts during the fight. We then beat it. On my way to the next village, an Uragon gets in the way, so we defeat it. We then encounter the monster causing the red pits. Luckily, Shovel arrived just in time to rescue us. We then find the village and make an offer to deal with the Nergigante for them. While searching for Nergigante, we fight a Rage Raid Rathalos. Yeah, this was a brutal fight. Red and Nightwing ended up dying and I fainted as well, causing us to lose the fight. Ugh. I then return and things go a lot smoother. I was able to keep Ratha in the whole fight. His base form uses technical attacks, and so I focused on using power attacks. When enraged, it goes for power, so naturally we switch to speed. And once it gets in the air, it goes for speed attacks, so naturally switch into technical attacks. Ratha beats Rathalos in an air showdown. And then after 3 kinship scales, Rathalos finally goes down. We head back to rest to then get a report of a monster at the Lake of Flames that might be the monster we're looking for. While searching for the monster in the Lake of Flames, I picked up an egg from a common den and from a rare den. We then find that the monster is not Nergigante, but raged-eyed Brachydios. Luckily, this fight was not hard thanks to Joker and my ice bow. I then hatched the eggs, receiving a shrouded Nersilia that I named Venom, and an Uragon, who I named Mega Chin. At the base of Turga, I found a rare den where I claimed a Zinogre egg. I then hatched the egg and named him Wolfang. After some grinding, I make Rathalos' armor, greatsword, and hammer. I also make Zinogre's bow. After training like a madman, it was time to fight Nergigante, who is by no means easy. Nergigante's base form uses mostly technical attacks, which threw me off guard since I started with Wolfang, assuming it would start with power attacks. I then switched to Laggy and started using power attacks. Nergigante's spikes come out, causing it to use power attacks. I decided to go for the wings. Nergigante is a very heavy hitter and has moves that hit multiple times, one of them causing me to faint. I then switched to Wolfang to counter Nergigante's power attacks. I healed Wolfang with a Mega Potion and everyone else did damage. Nergi then enrages, which is very scary because it has a team attack that does a lot of damage. Shovel stops the first Calamity Slash with a Kinship move. Nergi also will go for speed attacks. However, once it starts trying to use Calamity Slash, it'll keep trying until it does use it. I healed Wolfang up and both Shovel and I faint. He goes back to base form and we repeat the process until Nergi lands a critical attack causing me to faint. Bruh. Yeah, it took me several attempts, but I finally got the best run. I started with Laggy and the greatsword to just do damage. Once the spikes came out, I swapped to my bow and paralyzed it. It also helped that I didn't faint from his multi-hitting attack. I bring Wolfang out and continue to counter its power attacks. Nergi enrages and I switch to Bruce to attempt to beat its speed, but also to spare my other monsties from its Calamity Slash. I used Absolute Evasion, allowing me to avoid the Calamity Slash. Bruce and Rathy ended up fainting to Calamity Slash. The fight continues. Laggy and I break its wings. Nergi enrages and luckily doesn't immediately go for Calamity Slash, allowing me to build up the Kinship bond more, which allows me to break its claws with a Kinship attack. We continue to damage Nergi and he causes me to faint. After several more turns, we finally defeated Nergigante. Just for Oltura to show up, and of course both Ratha and Nergigante want to fight it. Shovel slows Nergi down. Nope. Thankfully, we didn't have the same outcome like Grandpa Red did. We then found the truth behind the Razorwing Rathalos legend. Afterwards, Kyle shows up and I team up with him again and we investigate some more pits. We encountered a Rage Raid Glavenus. The fight is pretty easy. Unfortunately, Venom ends up dying because I didn't realize that Glavenus had swapped to technical attacks. I bring Laggy out since it has Wretched Water. Eventually, we slay Glavenus. I make Glavenus' greatsword since against Glacial Agnactor is the next boss fight. Glacial started off with power attacks, which threw me off guard because I thought it would use tentacle attacks. Once the armor came off, it started using tentacle attacks. Once in rage, it switched to speed attacks, so I switched to Chameleon, who unfortunately dies. I brought Destroyer out. After a while, I brought Wolfang out, who paralyzes Glacial. With a few more hits, Glacial goes down. In the Spire Rock Everden, I picked up a Brute Tigrex egg, and in the East Comuna Everden, I grabbed a Black Diablo's egg. At the third pit, Naviru gets ambushed by a Gendrum. Good job, idiot. While fighting Gendrum, a Raid Basilgeuse shows up. Oh boy. The fight goes relatively smooth. Despite winning the breath battle, Laggy ends up dying from the Blast Blight. Wolfang comes out, and after a few more turns, Basilgeuse dies. We head back to Duati village and are ambushed by Zellard and his riders. Zellard demands we give him Ratha, but we refuse, and he leaves us with his lackeys. Luckily, they weren't difficult to beat. Lilia and the other Scriveners show up to deal with the goons. Lilia informs us that Oltura's birthplace is on Hakolo Island. We make our way there and see a giant pillar luring in the Rathalos. Kana starts to get worried, and I calm her down. What the frick is this relationship? I hatch the Brute Tigrex egg and name it Conqueror. We find and calm Guardian Ratha, but Zeller takes advantage of this and captures Ratha. Bruh. He forces Ratha's powers out. Luckily, with Wolfang, we were able to calm Ratha down. Zeller goes all nuts and tries to sacrifice Ratha and himself. We start falling, but Guardian Ratha comes to rescue us and helps me rescue Ratha and sacrifice himself, causing Oltura to awaken. And it also saves Zellard, and we made our way to fight Oltura. And Oltura proved to be very difficult. In its base form, it goes for tentacle attacks. I decided to switch from the greatsword to the bow to try to paralyze it, but turns out that wasn't working. Honestly, I had no idea how to fight this monster. Once it enrages, it starts using power attacks. After Ratha's head-to-head fight left him with half health, I swapped into Destroyer. After some damage, Oltura transforms into its Thunderblaze form, which I hate so badly. We heal up, and this made me realize that I was insanely unprepared for this fight. The annoying thing about this form is that I get stuck healing. Luckily, Kyle had a Kinship attack ready, and Destroyer did decent damage. Unfortunately, Destroyer ends up dying to Blaze Tempest. So I bring Joker out, I heal up, and we all get hit by Thunder Tempest, and Joker gets paralyzed. Yeah, fun time. A flame bullet causes me to faint. Joker and I get a double attack protecting us both and raising our kinship skill. Our kinship skill manages to break one of its wings, stopping it from attacking twice. I bring Wolfang out and I die to a thunder bullet.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not.
Okay, attempt 2. Destroyer still ended up dying. We managed to break the wings and cause it to go back to its base form. After some more damage, Oltura enters into its freezing downpour form. I swear this thing has to be related to Elatrion. Ratha ends up dying after a few more turns, and Aqua Tempest kills me. Attempt number 3. I finally buy more healing items. This time we managed to beat its ice water form. After some more attacks, Oltura falls, or so we thought. Phase 2 is a dragon form. Just like the base form, it will mostly use tentacle attacks. After some healing and Destroyer winning the head-to-head, I swapped him out to Ratha. We had to prioritize the wings to decrease the amount of times Oltura could attack in a row. I also had discovered that double attacks were more efficient against Oltura. However, I still ended up fainting thanks to a dragon bullet. Ugh. The fight continues and I faint to another dragon bullet. With a combined kinship attack, we broke the last wing. This causes Oltura to charge up for a final attack that is timed. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do enough damage and ended up dying. So, I decided to make Stygian Zenogre's greatsword for the dragon damage and because it was a much powerful greatsword. Attempt number 4, we get to the swallowing point again. On turn 51, we broke one wing, and on the next turn, with a kinship attack, Ratha and I broke the second wing. This opens a cutscene where Kyle shoots Oltura's 2 wings with special arrows, and Ratha and I essentially defeat Oltura once and for all, thus bringing the end end of our journey and of this challenge. This was a really fun challenge and really difficult towards the end, which I'm actually really glad that it wasn't like a pushover. If y'all enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and leave a like. Also, go check out my hardcore Nuzlocke in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. I promise y'all will enjoy it.